Good evening, and welcome to Norton from Home. My name is Glenn Tomlinson, and I'm the William Randolph Hearst Chief Officer of Learning and Community Engagement at the Norton. Thank you for joining us for our virtual conversation, Viola Frey and the Artist's Legacy Foundation. The exhibition, For the Record, Celebrating Art by Women, includes the monumental ceramic sculpture Weeping Woman, created by the San Francisco Bay artist Viola Frey. During her long career, Frye produced an impressive body of work, including paintings, drawings, and sculptures. In 2000, Frye co-founded the Artist's Legacy Foundation to encourage artists to consider their own legacies and how their estates could support working artists. Through research, publications, and exhibitions, the foundation serves as an educational resource for curators, scholars, and the general public by deepening their understanding of legacy artists. We're pleased to welcome Julia Schwartz and Cynthia de Bos, directors of the Artist's Legacy Foundation, for a conversation tonight exploring Frye's career and the foundation's history and vision. I'd like to introduce our speakers, but before I do, I would really like to encourage all of you to consider sharing your questions in our chat throughout the course of the conversation. There will be a Q&A at the end of the program, and you're welcome to leave your questions, which we can address at that time. Julia Schwartz is the Director of Administration and Development at the Artist's Legacy Foundation. And there she facilitates the foundation's awards and manages outreach and education programs. Schwartz received a Bachelor of Science at UC Davis and has worked as a consultant to artists and arts nonprofits since 2005. Cynthia de Bos, Director of Collections and Archives, manages the artwork and archives of legacy artists and has managed the archives of Viola Frey since 2013. De Bos received a Master's of Arts at San Francisco State University, and she's consulted with museums, private collections, and foundations since 2008. Again, please remember you have the opportunity to submit your comments and questions throughout the program by using the chat feature on YouTube and Facebook. We'll dedicate the final minutes of the program to address your questions. But now, it's my pleasure to welcome Julia Schwartz to the program.
Thanks, Glenn. It's great to be here and to speak with all of you today. I'm going to give you a little bit of an introduction to the foundation and what we do here at Artist's Legacy Foundation. So we're a multi-artist endowed foundation, which means that we are supported by the endowments of artists. So we envision several artists coming together to fully endow this project. And our first legacy artist is Viola Frey. Our motto is artists supporting artists, and we do that through three programs. First, stewarding the legacies of deceased artists like Viola Frey. Second, celebrating living artists through awards and grants. And third, acting as an educational resource for artists and their families to learn more about a variety of topics related to long-term studio management and estate planning. So I'm going to dive in a little bit more. We can go to the next slide. First, we steward the work of legacy artists. And what does that mean? What does that include? For us, it includes artworks, the artist's papers or archives, which may also include a set of photographs, slides, 4x5s, all of the images and miscellaneous papers in the studio, including sales records as well. And then the artist's reputation. Maybe they were a professor or a teacher at an art university and influenced generations of artists. And that's really important to capture as we carry forward their message. Maybe they were a community leader. Maybe they worked at an arts center and also influenced generations of artists and bettered the community through their activism. So in thinking about the way that we can carry forward these legacies, we do it through a variety of ways, but exhibitions are the most common. And so we work with museums and galleries to help them access the work or access the archives for research. We're really trying to open the doors so that this work is, the archives are not just locked away and for exclusive use. And we also hold public programs like today, just sharing information about the artist and what they did during their life and how they impacted future generations. We also work on publications. Some of them are produced in-house and others are produced in collaboration with institutions. So there's kind of a variety of ways that we can uplift the artist and make their work more accessible to the public. And as always, we've always got digital programs, and so websites and social media are kind of baked into what we do here at the foundation in terms of making the work accessible to the next generation of students, scholars, and the general public. So while we currently steward the estate of one artist, we are anticipating bequests from other artists in the future. So we've got promised artists and we've got others that we're actively speaking with. And I'll speak a little bit more about that process later. But we can move on to the next slide. Talking a little bit more about how we recognize artists. You may see some familiar faces here. These are some of the 15 past recipients of the Artists Legacy Foundation's Artist Award, including Howardina Pindell, Judith Shea, Jim Nutt, Donna Nelson, Peter Williams, Suzanne Freecon, and many others. The Artist Award is a $25,000 honor that's given annually to an outstanding painter or sculptor. And these artists are nominated anonymously by members of the community and selected by a jury. And so this is really about lifting up artists who are excelling in what they do and recognizing them for what they've contributed to visual culture. The funds for this award we consider posthumous philanthropy. There are some artists who during their lifetime don't have liquid assets to actively donate back to the community, but perhaps through the sale of their home or studio after their death, which goes into the bequest, they're able to do something really meaningful, like contribute to this artist award. We do have our next Artist Award being announced in just a few weeks, and I hope you will join us in celebrating them. We're having a program on October 22nd, and so you can sign up or check out our website for more details on that in the coming weeks. We can move on to the next slide. So the third thing we do here is acting as an educational resource for artists and the wider community, really. We've been in touch with many artists and also family members of deceased artists who say, I've inherited this body of work and these archives, and what next? What are the best practices? What can I do? And since we're always learning more about the best practices from our peers and things change, there are new technologies that we can take advantage of. We're really there to be a resource for the greater community. One of the things that we do in the community is I host a legacy discussion group, and this is a free gathering online. We do it on Zoom, and it's a way for artists to get together and speak to each other. It's really about crosstalk with peers about what's worked for them and what they recommend or don't recommend. And so it's not a top-down discussion. It's really a collaborative community discussion. And we talk about topics like long-term planning, estate planning, and some of the nitty-gritty studio management details like image management or digital asset management. If you're interested in joining us, we always love to have more members. The other educational outreach that we do is to student groups. There are a lot of art colleges around here who simply don't discuss the business of art. And so we welcome small groups of students, and we talk about Viola Frey's archives and archives in general and ways to set aside objects so that you'll have historical documentation in the future. So I'm always happy to speak with people about studio management or ideas for artist estates. If you want to check in with me by email or call, we're here to be a resource, really. We can move on to the next slide. So the foundation's goal here is to be an administrative hub for a group of artists. So like I said, a multi-artist endowed foundation. And this is really for artists who may be considering establishing a foundation on their own, but they're concerned about possibly the expense of the administration of a foundation, or they're concerned about leadership and who will come together as their group, and will those people be around for a long time, or will they be consistent in taking care of the artist's estate? It's certainly something that we've heard from other artists, that they want to make sure that there's a consistency and a level of professionalism, and that's something that we can offer. You know, we have this core knowledge and kind of investment in the Artist Endowed Foundation, the future of the foundation, and also the best practices. And so we can carry that through not only for Viola Frey, but for other artists who come into the foundation as well. And our board is actively involved in policy making and big decisions, and we're proud to have museum leaders, foundation and estate leaders, and artists on our board, so that we get different perspectives on how things can work and what the best practices might be for us. So we're really thinking about it from a few different angles here. We do see this as a concept that could be replicated with other groups. Maybe there's another group of regional artists, and they say, we've all been working together or working in the same region for a while. We could pool our resources or pool our administrative costs and work a little bit more efficiently. So if there's somebody who wants to replicate this, I'm always happy to talk with you about logistics as well. So we can move on to the next slide. I'm going to give a little brief introduction to Viola Frey and her connection with the Artist Legacy Foundation. When the foundation was founded by Squeak Carnwath, Gary Knecht, and Viola Frey, and really Squeak and Gary were starting to do some thinking about starting a foundation, and Viola said, you know, can I be a part of it? And this idea for a multi-artist endowed foundation really catalyzed. But it wasn't until her passing in 2004 that the wheels really got rolling. And so her estate provided the foundation with the artwork and records and her paper archives, but they came in kind of a jumble. Viola was not fully organized. She didn't have everything documented. And so what came to us was not in tip-top shape. And that's always something for artists to consider. How organized are your studio files? And do you have everything recorded in one place? We should all be so lucky to have a full inventory. But in the case of Viola Frey, we were lucky enough to have binders and binders full of slides. And so we took the time to go through those slides and really contain everything within one database. There are still question marks. There will always be question marks with any artist, but we are working towards solving some of those questions as we look through the archival papers and as we speak with people who are still alive who may have had some connection to her life or her studio. So one of the other things that the foundation did right off the bat was create a finding aid so that researchers could come in and start to do research in the archives. Our goal is always to make the archives as accessible as possible for researchers. And so we do that through physical labeling of the boxes, through the finding aid, and through making digital assets that people can take back with them to their homes to continue to read through the materials. So we've been fortunate that Frye's work is now in even more public collections, and so it's gone on view many exhibitions, including this one. And that's a collaboration, sometimes through the foundation's donations or gift purchases, and sometimes through private collectors. Since 2004, her works have been included in over 115 exhibitions, including 14 solo presentations. Her work's been referenced in over 300 publications, including dozens that the foundation has actively worked with galleries and museums to produce. And as I said, we've organized thousands of slides, 4x5s, and photographs, many of which are now digitized. And the archive papers have been reviewed and rehoused, And we're continually finding new papers to add to the archives, or assets to add to the archive, to make it a richer experience for future researchers. We do have some upcoming digital projects that we'll be announcing in a couple of months, but I will keep it mum for now. And I think now is a great time to pass it over to my colleague Cynthia de Bos to talk more about Viola Frey's artwork and her life.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you, Glenn, for the introduction to Viola Frey and the Foundation. Hello, everybody. As mentioned earlier, Viola Frey was a multidisciplinary artist, and she made paintings, drawings, bronze and glass, and most notably ceramic sculpture. Frye was obsessively devoted to her practice and produced thousands of artworks during her lifetime. And it's interesting that every once in a while we find a new one come up online, or a collector comes to us and says, hey, I have this. And so we add it to the catalog. And so the next slide. Viola Frey was the second oldest of 4 children and grew up on a grape farm with her brothers in rural Lodi, California during the Depression and World War II years. She recalled her father and grandfather being avid junk collectors, and her paternal grandmother as a very independent woman who ran the farm. After high school, she attended the local community college and then transferred 75 miles southwest to California College of Arts and Crafts, or CCAC, after receiving a scholarship to attend there in 1953. She majored in painting because at that time, painting was a serious course of artistic study. However, she gravitated to the ceramics department and studied with Vernon Kuykendall and Charles Fisk because, she later put it in an interview, it had people of all ages in it. It seemed more like the real world. It was a community. In May of 1954, Frye submitted Patio Planter, which was entered in the category of sculpture at the 13th Annual Pacific Coast Ceramic Exhibition in San Francisco, California. The juried selection was open to all, students and established ceramists alike. Frye won second prize for sculpture. And if you look closely, Manuel Neri won first prize for sculpture. Despite her interest in clay, she continued her studies under painter Richard Diebenkorn and received her BFA for painting in 1955. She went on to graduate school to pursue an MFA in painting at Tulane University in New Orleans. It was there she met and studied with ceramist Catherine Choi and visiting abstract painter Mark Rothko. Frye left New Orleans just before completing her MFA to join Choi at the newly formed Cooperative Clay Art Center in Port Chester, New York. It was there that Frye worked alongside fellow artists whom all believed in the pioneering idea of promoting clay as a medium for fine art. Notably, at a time when abstract expressionism was at the fore. Because the center was a startup and produced no salary, Frye secured a job at the Museum of Modern Art in New York in the billing department to support herself. Her time in New York provided the opportunity to see exhibitions that she'd later recall as influential in her artistic practice, including Picasso's 75th anniversary exhibition, as well as Richard Diebenkorn's 1958 show at Poindexter Gallery. Frye would later note that Diebenkorn had jumped the boat from abstraction and shifted to painting the figure. The pursuit of the figure as subject was one of the reasons she left New York and returned to the Bay Area in 1960. Upon her return, Frye produced functional vessels that were sculptural in nature, often with the figure included. She submitted works to craft shows and won prizes. Author Devira Terragon notes that even though she objected to the word craft and the organizations established to promote it, Frye found her earliest support came from this world. Local juried craft shows and institutions such as the Museum of Contemporary Craft in New York played significant roles in establishing her career. In 1967, Frye was hired to teach a summer course as a visiting assistant professor in advanced ceramics at the Art Institute of Chicago. While there, she spent countless hours wandering the halls of the Field Museum, which was a jumble of natural wonders and cultural artifacts, and according to Frye, arranged in beautiful positions. In a review for the two-person show from the Chicago Sun-Times, critic Harold Hayden writes, "Californian Viola Frey is a sculptural potter. Her powerful plastic shapes sometimes carry incised linear patterns, and she has a genius for emphasizing form with strips and patches of glaze." Upon return to the Bay Area in the fall, Frye continued to develop her work based on her experiences. Author Mark Van Proyen suggests that some of Frye's earliest figurative work, such as the fragment series seen here, may have been a response to several exhibitions Frye would have seen at MoMA, New York during her time there, including artists like Jean Dubuffet, Alberto Giacometti, Willem de Kooning, Pablo Picasso, Max Beckmann, Henri Matisse, and others. Here is an installation view of drawings and sculptures from Trophies in Clay by Viola Frey at the Chabot College in 1969, which featured the fragment series. One of the work from this series, entitled A Visually Haunting Image, is depicted here. In June of '67, the headline from an Oregon newspaper read, "Dull Show by San Francisco Potters Enlivened with a Few Strong Works," and noted Viola Frey has the ability to handle the materials in a way which gives the viewer something to sense and to think about. The next year, this sculpture received first prize in Media 68 at the Civic Art Gallery in Walnut Creek, California. In 1969, Frye marked the start of her serious artistic career when she was able to convert the basement of her house in San Francisco to create her very own studio space. No longer required to work with the kilns at CCAC, this dedicated space allowed for greater exploration and productivity. In this image I found just this week, it's a view of the upstairs area of her San Francisco home where she's standing with finished and partially finished artworks. Also during this time, Frye began to use bright colors on her ceramic sculptures by airbrushing China paints onto her sculptural pots. By putting together her training as a painter and her passion for clay, Frye shifted between two-dimensional and three-dimensional artworks with ease, often while exploring myriad themes at the same time. Frye made a series of tabletop ceramic tableaus in the early to mid-1970s. She would make plaster molds out of her figures, then cast, arrange, fire, and paint them, sometimes with incredible detail. Intended to engage the viewer both visually and intellectually with their unexpected mix of elements, they exist as snapshots as if coming from a dream. In an interview with Leslie Wenger in 1975, Frye mentioned loving the word apologue, which is a dialogue between inanimate objects and people. Frye explored the apologue idea in a variety of ways, from the creation of the small tabletop tableaus to highly detailed paintings such as this one, which depicts an imagined interaction between her collectibles and her physical surroundings. Frye also used her figurines to stage tableau settings and took more than 400 images on slide film of these arrangements, many of which she printed using the color Xerox machine at CCAC. Frye later noted, "I looked at them in different ways, looked at them in different light. The photos allowed me to work on the image and the emotions behind them." In 1975, Frye moved to Oakland and expanded her studio space, which included a large outdoor area for viewing her sculptures in natural light. Frye devoted the latter half of the 1970s to studying and exploring her work in different ways, and with essentially the goal of filling up her house with work. She recalled, "First, First, I wanted to spend some time looking at the art myself. I felt I needed to set some guidelines for where I wanted the work to go, and I needed to make some work in order to figure that out. Second, there wasn't any interest in my work. Large-scale clay in those days did not appeal to the general audience of collectors. In a 1988 interview, Frye said, "The grandmother types of the 1940s and 50s that I knew were independent and very strong. They were the wives of ranchers, and they were socially successful. Their lives were not characterized by monotony and routine, but rather they were involved. I did the hardest figure first, which was the grandmother with power, not only structurally, but in terms of idea." And here's Double Grandmother. Thank you, Greg. Here's Double Grandmother, which marked the first purchase of a major museum in 1981, and it's at Minneapolis Institute of Art. Beginning in the late 1970s and spanning a decade, Frye made more than 60 bronzes devoted to various themes. Her smallest bronzes, seen here, were modeled from figurines and pictures she collected or events from her life, and could be arranged to create various tableaux. Other bronzes she made included replicas of her ceramic sculptures, small and life-size grandmothers, clay figure sketches, bricolages, and even a 10.5-foot monumental suited man. The bronzes here range from 11 inches high to 4 feet tall and are each uniquely painted. Here is a painting on paper with thick application of oil and acrylic paint. Frye would apply a base layer of color, which was often black, and apply canvas cutouts created from her figurines to the surface and paint around them. She made a series of abstracted portraits using this layering system, which was a technique she also used on her plates. Those of you familiar with Viola Frey may know she was a collector of tchotchkes, of figurines and knickknacks she accumulated on her visit to flea markets. And in addition to posing and painting them, she molded them and made slip casts to create replicas so she could assemble her bricolages, or junk pieces as she called them, into abstract personas. In 2010, Patterson Sims explained that the bricoleur builds up structures by fitting together events, or rather the remains of events. He works with odds and ends that are readily at hand, pertinent to his time, and he uses them to explore themes and tasks that he finds compelling and interesting. Here is another version of the layering process on canvas this time, but her silhouettes were painted in and then cut out in certain areas and left to curl, which allowed the plane to become a three-dimensional painting. And here you see a detail of that where there's shadows and figures kind of distorted, which is a conservator's nightmare, but fun nonetheless. Viola Frey's first retrospective came in 1981 when she was 48. The opening exhibition was at the Crocker Art Museum in Sacramento, California, near her hometown, and included more than 100 ceramic sculptures, plates, paintings, works on paper, and photographs. A smaller version of the exhibition traveled to 6 additional venues. As for the bricolage sculptures pictured here, Frye noted there is a tremendous amount of excitement in being able to make something out of the worst kind of throwaways, whether it is old functional pieces like cups and vases, to figurines, to Buddhas, to piggy banks. It is a tremendous challenge. A review of this exhibition in American Craft magazine noted that Frye is able to work simultaneous on or alternate between so many disciplines, formats, and subjects is a tribute to her capacity for invention and to the energy of her ideas. Though the exhibition includes merely a fraction of her oeuvre, this exhibit nevertheless represents where Viola Frey has been and where she might be going next. Here is an installation view of the plate wall where similarities and differences abound. Her plates were intended to be a sketch of sorts where she could work on several plates exploring iconography, ideas, and technique in one afternoon. They are the opposite of her larger-than-life figures. These are intended to be observed up close. In an interview given around 1981, Frye states, "If you look at my paintings, they're all inhabited by things I own and by events I've directly experienced. They are paintings of my studio, paintings of objects I made, and other things that I have, through direct experience, earned the right to render on canvas." In 1984, Frye had her first solo exhibition in New York at the Whitney Museum of American Art. Curated by Patterson Sims, he noted this show addresses the omission of Frye's work from the clay show co-organized in 1981 by the Whitney with the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, which represented the work of 6 of Frye's colleagues on the West Coast, with the purpose of demonstrating that clay had entered the mainstream as a medium for contemporary sculpture. This follow-up response to include Frye in the discourse featured 10 larger-than-life ceramic figures, as well as sculpture, plates, and paintings. As a result of the exhibition, she gained attention and credibility as an artist on the East Coast, where the figure had once been ignored and clay had been an unsuitable medium for fine art. Sims also wrote for the exhibition that Frye's non-functional plates cannot be classified as either traditional or painting or sculpture. The vessel has turned pictorial, and its narrative, like its circular border, flows inconclusively. Using replica bric-a-brac objects, Frye concocts from the trite a complex cultural narrative. The figures grew taller when Frye moved to her studio warehouse in Oakland in 1983. The move also marks a shift in her artistic practice as well. She almost exclusively painted on ceramics or paper, and she began to focus on the figure in greater detail, often inviting a nude model to pose for drawing sessions while the kiln was firing the week's progress. Here is a view of the same warehouse with Kevin Anderson, who was Frye's first studio assistant, next to her sculptures and drawings. In 1985, Frye created her Reclining Man, which portrays a nude male as a vulnerable figure in response to Kevin Anderson's death from AIDS. In an interview, Frye acknowledged she lost several more friends to the AIDS epidemic, including her friend and CCAC colleague, Art Nelson. Frye continued to focus on different positions, both reclining and seated, which changed how the viewer interacts with the sculpture. In 1995, she noted that she couldn't have arrived at these more vulnerable figures without doing the work that came before it first. Of the reclining figures, Frye said, "It's one of the few times in history that men have been shown in a position of vulnerability. They are usually shown as warriors. Part of the sensibility I bring as a woman artist is not to leave them completely tied into that tradition." Here is one of Frye's charcoal drawings, which likely began as a figure study with the figure in the center, and she would then surround the drawing with figurines and icons from her imagination. And in this drawing, their eyes are closed as if in a dreamlike state. By the end of the 1980s, Frye had explored 4 different modes of power in her monumental figures. The reclining nude woman, who was powerful and subversive to the male gaze. The reclining nude man, as an homage to vulnerability, the opposite of men as warriors. The suited man, as an intimidating power, an anonymous, awkward, and constricted corporate man bent under the weight of their responsibilities and often angry. And the grandmothers were women who made their own destiny. They were figures of power captured in time. Of the grandmother sculptures, Frye recalled, her ranch grandmother was control and really in charge. She's the one I remember. All statues of generals on horseback in parks should be replaced by grandmothers. This exhibition at Nancy Hoffman Gallery in 1991 is reminiscent of the tableaus she created in the 70s. The complex pastel drawings on the wall serve as an extension of the monumental figures themselves. The figure on the left is called Falling Man in Suit, and the one on the right is Weeping Woman, which is at the Norton. Frye's figure drawing sessions eventually evolved into complex scenes replete with her iconography, bold colors, and hidden meaning. The gloved hand of the worker, the vulnerable nude male, the ominous silhouette standing on his shoulder. These symbols mixed with snippets of Frye's surroundings, the window in her backyard in Oakland, the figurine collection, and her accumulation of books and clippings for gathering ideas, are all represented and arranged in a dreamlike tableau. Here is Weeping Woman, and this view is currently at For the Record, Celebrating Art by Women, on view now at the Norton, if you get a chance to see it. I did some digging, and this is what I came up with. We have Weeping Woman represents Frye's fourth iteration of power, the nude woman subverting the male gaze. In 1994, columnist Marcia Tanner wrote of Frye's monumental female nudes. They are meant to subvert traditional male representations of the naked woman's body by expressing the perspective of the body's occupant, not the spectators. Strong and self-contained, they do nothing to invite the viewer's erotic fantasies. They define the terms by which they will be seen. I have yet to learn the source of Weeping Woman, but I do believe this may have been a direct response to what was going on in the world, loss of friends and other things. And because she expressed such sensitivity to loss in her own personal experience, we could argue that this is a continuation of Homage, which was primarily a male reclining figure series. I'd like to conclude with a quote written by writer Rena Jana in 2000. A syncretist of diverse styles and media, Viola Frey manifests her complex vision in a dizzying complex of media, references, and content, ranging from the primitive to the classical to the kitsch. She is at once the amalgamator and the innovator, an artist who has dared to experiment with and ultimately refine techniques in iconography that are decidedly and distinctively her own. Thank you, everyone. And now back to you, Glenn.
Thank you very much, both of you. So Cynthia and Julia, and I wanted to ask, and again, I encourage all of our listeners to join us with their own questions. Fascinating artist. There's this, as you've just shown us, a fascinating development in her work. What was it that inspired her or motivated her to move to such a monumental scale?
Challenge. I think somewhere in the interview she says no one was stupid enough to go that big, and she loved a challenge.
That's fantastic, and it's so interesting that she was responding, in the late 50s and the early 60s to the this shift in Bay Area figuration, right? That she was interested in becoming a part of that and decided to move back, as you said, in response to that, right? Who were some of the artists, perhaps in the Bay Area, perhaps elsewhere, whom she was very interested in?
She cites Diebenkorn as being, because she studied painting under him, even though he was very briefly at CCAC, she when she was a student, he was painting abstraction. And when she was in New York, he switched to figuration, and she said, "That's it, I want to go back." And I think her affinity for the figure even starts earlier, before she was seeing other people do the figure. And Julia, maybe you can chime in other areas that other artists that she was aware of. Certainly Elmer Bischoff is one of those, Philip Guston. But she was really looking at the artists that were doing figuration 50 years ago. The artists that she saw in New York were really her muse, I believe.
I think even more than that was her connection with objects of antiquity. When we look at the work that she was producing in the 60s and 70s, some of my favorite works, works that have not really bubbled up to the surface in the same way that her monumental figures, I think those influenced the later pieces very deeply. And I think a lot of those she's taking a very close look at pieces that were at the Field Museum, objects of antiquity from Greece and Rome and Peru, really ancient cultures. And it's interesting that she had this long partnership with Charles Fisk, who is a professor at CCAC as well. And he was in the Department of Art History and Architecture. And really, I think he brought in additional imagery that helped to inspire her.
And certainly even the title of the Fragments series sort of evokes that notion of fragments from the past, and that reference and perhaps that inspiration that you're talking about.
They're kind of hard to look at, in my opinion. They're really visceral and rough and something out of a nightmare. But she was looking at the early work of Dubuffet, who was doing like these really globby, visceral sculptures. And we see that with the Desert Toy series that Julia just mentioned, where there wasn't an intention to a finished product. It was really a feeling that she was trying to get at.
Yeah. Julia, is the Artists' Legacy Foundation unique?
I think we're unique. There are a few other foundations that are multi-artist endowed foundations. And I think we're going to start to see more. I think the Artist Endowed Foundation title in general and this group of foundations that are emerging as we see more and more artists pass away or thinking about what to do long term. We are seeing a lot of individual artist foundations popping up and really formalizing and grouping together. And we're proud to be a part of that association. But I think we are unique in the way that we set up the administrative end of things, that there are some pooled resources. And I'm happy to talk with anybody else who's interested in this type of organization because it is a little bit unique.
Well, and particularly, a point that struck me that when you were talking about the foundation, that you're really providing a lot of experience, but guidance for people who may be considering their future, and even, as you said, for student groups who may not be learning a great deal in the studio about the business of art.
Absolutely. And I think it causes a lot of stress in an artist's life when they get to the point of being ready to talk about this. Maybe they're in their 70s, maybe they're in their 80s, and all of a sudden it feels like there's a timeline that's shortening. And so we're hoping to provide people with information and share resources. And there are other foundations who have already established these booklets and workbooks, like the Joan Mitchell Foundation's Call resources. That's a favorite of ours. We think it's the tops, and it's something that I recommend to everybody. But if you're not, if you get a little overwhelmed with that, join us in the Legacy discussion group, and we're just going to take a small bit of it at a time and just work through each small aspect of formalizing a legacy or thinking about legacy. Every artist's goals have the potential to be different. Some artists may be interested in giving everything away, and others might be interested in holding everything back as a research tool. And so we really work with them on their terms.
That's terrific. And as you were pointing out to me at the beginning, a lot of artists' estates are managed by gallerists But of course, their primary way of operating is a commercial one, and instead of that, you're really focused upon education and continuing that artist's legacy, and certainly in the case of Viola Frey, just as you've both beautifully illustrated tonight.
Absolutely. Yeah, stewardship is our real goal. And while that does include commercial outreach and working with galleries, I think it is important to always have that library sense or kind of holding some works back for study always.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
One of the things that's really important to me as a legacy steward is just having a record, whether it's digital, paper, or in the flesh. I did a lot of research to compile the quotes and the things that I presented on tonight. And those resources didn't exist primarily in Viola's archives. They were found elsewhere in other people's archives. And so there's this sharing of knowledge and this coming together to really build out a story and understand an artist better is really important. And we see a lot more collaborations in the artist foundations on ways to do that and to get involved with your local archives to preserve the cultural history that we're working with.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I just wanted to come back to the artist again briefly, because it strikes me that she is one of I remember from the 80s how there was very much there was a lot of talk, and I'm sure that Viola Frey was part of the instigation for this. There was a lot of talk about the relationship of fine art, quote unquote fine art, and quote unquote craft, and she was really a seminal part of that discussion, wasn't she?
That's my interpretation. She never wanted to be a production potter, and in order to understand what a production potter is, I had to learn what that was. And it's somebody that fine tunes they're throwing on the wheel and can make the same thing over and over and over again. And Viola, from the very beginning, even as a student, didn't want to do production pottery, and she didn't want to learn how to bookbind, and she didn't want to do some of the classes that were required of the craft degree in ceramics at CCHC. And so because she wanted to be a unique artist and explore her own ideas, she stayed the artistic track, whatever that meant, whatever society was dictating, but she was able to make it her own and really contributed to putting clay in the mainstream for fine art.
Yeah, yeah. In our installation, thanks to Rachel Gustafson, the Weeping Woman has just such a commanding presence. I mean, it is fascinating, and it was very interesting to hear about those 4 different sorts of types of figure that she created, but you can absolutely sense that iteration of power, as you put it, that fourth, or as perhaps she put it, that 4th iteration of power, subverting the male gaze with Weeping Woman. It's a really wonderful work, and we're so proud to have it as part of the collection here at the Norton. And really, I can't thank you both enough for, first of all, telling us more about the artist's legacy, which is a fascinating a foundation, and congratulations to you both for your work there, and but also to just shedding more light on this amazing artist, and one whom, as I say, just created this commanding work that's in our collection, but obviously created a great deal more throughout a very, very prolific career. Thank you both for joining us tonight, and I really appreciate having you join us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us as well. And I just want to invite you, before we conclude tonight, to join us again on October 8th at 6 p.m. Our program will be virtual, although we will be migrating back to more live programming, particularly for those of you who enjoy these Friday evening sessions at Art After Dark. So we look forward to joining you for on those occasions. But October 8th will be a virtual program where we will feature Lori Barnes, the McGraw Curator of Chinese Art, and she will be discussing her most recent installation, The Other Half of the Sky, 20th Century Chinese Women Painters. Before then, of course, we look forward to seeing you at the museum, and we thank you so much for your joining us tonight, and be well and take care. Good night.